This is Dan Dix here, reporting for Press for Truth, and as NATO prepares for a summit in Warsaw, Canada has been asked to participate in a military deployment in the Baltic Sea region. Now, the purpose is to counter Putin's so-called Russian aggression and expansionism. But not since the days of the Soviet Union has NATO been so aggressive towards Russia, especially as Western forces move in on territory that was once under Russian influence. Now, to look at it another way, suppose that Canada instead sympathized with the Russians and they allowed them to build bases near the American border. In that case, if the Americans built up their defenses against the encroaching Russian military, well, we wouldn't say that it was America who was on the offensive. Yet this is exactly how it is in Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania and also Poland. And we, the independent media, are apparently Moscow's proxies, repeating Kremlin propaganda that Russia is a victim of NATO and that NATO are the aggressors here. While as Canada commits to deploy 1,000 troops to Latvia, NATO stands by their belief that the alliance does not seek confrontation and poses no threat to Russia. But of course, just because you say it, it doesn't make it true. While NATO sat back and allowed Russia to exercise its influence in Estonia and Georgia in 2007 and 2008, by the time Crimea became an issue in 2014, NATO had already decided that enough was enough. And as Russian military infrastructure expands into the Arctic, well, Western propaganda casts Russia as a direct threat to Canada, despite how a large majority of us live within a couple of 100 miles from the U.S. border, not up in the Arctic tundra. But nothing will stop the Western elites from trying to take over the world. You know, Brexit and the breakup of the EU is probably going to serve Putin's interest. And moreover, NATO is not attacking Russian sovereignty, but defending the nations the alliance represents. And it's this kind of nonsense that fills the media airwaves, indoctrinating Canadians into thinking that we're the good guys here. And this, in spite of America's obvious aggression overseas. Under Obama, the U.S. has invaded more countries than they did under Bush, which really should just go to show you it really doesn't matter who is president. And according to Obama, NATO needs more Canada because the Canadian Armed Forces are, and I quote, really good. It seems that with only a few months left here in Obama's presidency, his speechwriters have just completely given up. But nevertheless, like Orwell's 1984, the truth is the complete opposite of what Big Brother says. Russia is surrounded by Western bases, and since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the West has only moved closer and closer to their border. But no, it's apparently Russia that is the expansionist aggressor. And never mind that it was NATO that illegally invaded Syria, which has spread unprecedented chaos all throughout the Middle East, culminating in the rise of ISIS, a group that Russia has been successful at undermining despite how the Americans continue to funnel arms and money to these jihadists. Now, when the Liberals took over the Harper regime, the new Foreign Affairs Minister, Stefan Dion, told journalists that it was counterproductive not to talk with Russia. He said, "Look, Canada was speaking to the Russians even at a tough time of the Cold War, and now we're not speaking. Almost not. Because of the former policy of the former government. In which way it's helping Ukraine. In which way it's helping our interest in the Arctic." Good questions, but it's too bad the Liberals disregarded their own advice and they adopted the policy of the former government and of the U.S. military-industrial complex. Folks, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to fact check all of this info by checking the links in the description. And also check for the links to where you can donate to Press for Truth, or you can become a PFT member. We need your support. There's a lot more things coming up to cover very soon, like the RNC in Cleveland, for example. So check the links in the description to find out how you can support us in order to help us get there to provide that coverage. And thanks again so much for watching. Stay tuned, guys. We've got more video reports coming soon to pressfortruth.ca. There would always be a buffer zone between the West and Russia. Well, despite agreeing to this exchange, US and NATO broke their pledge almost immediately. NATO is now in Eastern Europe, the Baltic states, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. And the US-led alliance is literally creeping up against Russia's borders.